I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. Defense Minister Anita Anand says Canada will invest $4.9 billion over the next 6 years to modernize North America's aging defensive systems. Minister Anand says the funding is the first of an estimated $40 billion that will be spent over the next 20 years. The money will upgrade the joint U.S.-Canadian early warning system known as NORAD and purchase other military assets to protect the continent. The announcement was made Monday morning, and it comes amid numerous warnings from the U.S. and Canadian military officials and experts that NORAD is badly showing its age. Well, with us now to discuss the state of NORAD and what upgrades may be necessary is Mr. Richard Chimuka, defense expert and senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
Now, firstly, for those who may not be familiar, what exactly is NORAD?
So NORAD is a unique construct. It's actually a binational command where you have Canadian and American forces basically operating at the same desk together, collectively, jointly, and they have units, both Canadian and American, that are tasked for defending the North American continent, more aimed towards the north, but there are some assets that kind of look south and to the east and the west.
And we mentioned experts are warning that the system is aging. So what exactly do they mean by that? And what is the state of North America's defensive systems currently?
So the last major upgrade to NORAD occurred in the late 80s and early 90s between the Reagan administration and Brian Mulroney, as was the prime minister at the time. This was a huge upgrade to the radar sites that they're basically all in the north of Canada and Alaska, and they're trained towards any sort of Russian, or at that time it was Soviet, but now Russian sort of missiles and aircraft that might be approaching our borders from that direction. What we've had in the past 10, 15 years is there's been new technologies that have been developed by the Russians and the Chinese and some of the sort of smaller rogue actors like North Korea, which are hypersonics, which are basically missiles or glide vehicles, as they're known, that operate just at the sort of boundary of space and atmosphere, and they're able to sort of bounce around and are very difficult to detect and sort of attack or sort of prosecute with current systems. So these new technologies require an update to our existing systems. A lot of the systems that we purchased in the late 80s and early 90s are sort of reaching the end of their sort of useful life, and they do need replacement just as a general rule. So that's basically the aim. That's part of the primary sort of considerations that are going forward right now on what we call as NORAD modernization.
So what sort of investments and upgrades has the Canadian government announced for this system?
So one of the biggest ones, or one of the most critical ones, is a set of new type of radar called over-the-horizon radar systems. Now, OTH, the systems aren't necessarily new, but technology, sort of large data computing systems and new radar systems are able to make this a much more effective kind of approach to detecting potential threats. And what they do, they kind of use the ionosphere and sort of very high levels of at very high altitudes, different parts of the Earth's kind of atmosphere to bounce radar waves back across the horizon. And Canada is going to try to invest into a new type of system, or a new over-the-horizon radar system that's going to be developed and deployed in Canada in order to cover huge swaths of the northern reaches of the country, or northern reaches of our country and the United States, in order to protect our northern approaches.
And what about the United States? What sort of role have they played in updating our defensive systems? About a minute left, sir.
They're actually the more important part of it. They bankroll the larger proportion of NORAD modernization. Canada's contributions tends around 40%, somewhere around 45, 35%, somewhere in there. So the United States is absolutely essential for this, and they actually provide more of the largest proportion of aircraft that defend our north and other assets and capabilities.
All right, Mr. Chimuka, a quick 45 seconds left here, but what are you watching for next after this announcement?
Well, the development of these systems, specifically the over-the-horizon systems, these are technologies that are really early in their sort of development, and they could be extremely costly. we don't know what are the risks and the sort of the issues with them. So I'm kind of watching how they're going to approach this issue, because this will be something that we've never really tried before, and how it goes is anybody's guess at this point in time.
Lots to keep our eyes on. Mr. Richard Shamuka from MLI, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
Forum Daily Week in Review will be right back after a short break. Stay with us. The United Nations Global Fund for Education in Emergencies and Protracted Crises released a shocking report this week. The fund, also known as Education Cannot Wait, says the number of crisis-impacted school-aged children requiring educational support has grown. This from an estimated 75 million in 2016 to 222 million today. These alarming new figures are released against the backdrop of a recent ECW study, which shows that the response to education in emergencies and crises remains underfunded. And this has worsened since the COVID-19 pandemic. To respond to this global education crisis, ECW and strategic partners have launched the hashtag 222 Million Dreams campaign. Well, joining us now to unpack the situation and this campaign is Ms. Yasmin Sharif, the director of ECW, joining us from Geneva, Switzerland. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you very much.
So let's start with a brief overview of the findings of this recent study.
Well, when Education Cannot Wait, which is the United Nations Global Fund for Education Emergency and Protracted Crisis, was established at the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016, the estimated number of children and youth, half of them girls, stood at 75 million. And today, just over 6 years later, we have found through our methodology and research that the actual figure is 222 million children and youth, half of them girls. Of those, 78.2, that's 35%, they are completely out of school. 119.6, that's 54%, they're in school, they go to school, but there's no learning. They basically sit by a desk. No school books, no school feeding, there is no mental health services, they're simply not learning. And then a smaller percentage of 11%, 24.2 million, yes, they attend primary school and secondary school. They have some proficiency in literacy skills and math, but they lack psychosocial services, school feeding, water and sanitation, and many other factors that are so critically important for a child or youth to learn.
Some really heartbreaking numbers there, ma'am. Now, which countries and regions are most affected?
Well, let's start. The worst affected are sub-Saharan Africa. And here we speak Sahel, the Sahel, Mali, Central African Republic, Chad, the Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, Sudan. The sub-Saharan Africa and Sahel are the worst off. Then we have across the Middle East, refugees from Syria. We have Iraq, Palestine refugees, Yemen, and then refugees from Venezuela, go into Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, and not the least in Asia, we have the Rohingya refugees, and then we have the children and the youth of Afghanistan. And as we saw today, it was an earthquake, but put that aside, they have suffered since 1979. It's a protracted crisis, the earthquake. And now secondary school girls have been banned to actually attend school together with extreme poverty and the wars that have been going on for decades. There's massive human suffering for young people out there.
Some really, really shocking information there, ma'am. About a minute and a half left here, but what sorts of education supports do these children need?
Well, it's the same that you and I had when we went to school, or all children and youth in Canada need, and all over the world. They need trained teachers who are skilled to deal with the traumas, because all of them are traumatized from conflict, climate-induced disasters. as refugees. So they need trauma counseling, they need good curriculums, well-trained teachers, school feeding, water and sanitation, health services, all that we benefited from. They have nothing, and there are 222 million of them. Education cannot wait. We are convening a high-level financing conference in Geneva, hosted by the Swedish government in 2023, together with Germany, Norway, South Sudan, and Niger. And we really hope to mobilize Canadian support. We know the great solidarity amongst Canadian people and around the globe, private sector and the government. Please help us to help them make the dreams come true.
And for our Canadian viewers watching this right now, check out hashtag 222 million dreams for more information. Ms. Sheriff, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
We'll be right back. Canada's federal government has implemented a regulatory ban on 6 single-use plastic items. This regulation bans companies from importing or making plastic bags, takeout containers, plastic straws, cutlery, stir sticks, and six-pack rings by the end of this year. Meanwhile, the House of Commons has resumed debate on Bill C-226, also known as the Environmental Racism Bill. The Canadian Coalition for Environment and Climate Justice has urged the government to expedite this bill's passage to the Senate before the summer recess. Well, joining us today to discuss these recent moves is Dr. Ingrid Waldron, co-founder and co-director of the CCECJ. Dr. Waldron, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's start with this, ma'am. What exactly is environmental racism, and what does it look like in Canada?
Environmental racism is a term that was coined in the early 1980s. So it's a term that's been around for quite some time. And basically what it means is that certain communities, particularly Indigenous and communities of color, tend to be selected disproportionately for the citing of environmental hazards like dumps, landfills, incinerators, more than other communities. And that the spatial patterning of industry, predominantly in communities of color, is an outcome of environmental policy and decision-making.
And how does Bill C-226 address the issue of environmental racism in Canada?
It addresses environmental racism in a number of ways. For the first time, with respect to this particular issue of environmental racism, we're asking the government to collect disaggregated race-based data, but race and socioeconomic status and environmental risk. So that's a bit groundbreaking. It's the first time that we've asked the government to do that with respect to this particular issue. It's also going to look at getting statistics on health risks associated with these industries, providing compensation to communities that have been impacted, and also kind of tracking cases of environmental racism across the country.
So it seems that this bill, there's a lot of research involved in this bill. So is there anything missing in terms of action to address this issue?
I don't think there's anything missing in terms of action. When I look at the bill now, I think perhaps we could have articulated certain things in a much more forceful way. When we talk about compensation, I don't want people to think that we are only looking at past cases or historical cases, because certainly, there's reparations required for Africville in Nova Scotia, and that's no longer a community in Halifax. They've dispersed. So I'm not sure if the language is strong enough in the bill in terms of, we do want to know about past cases and historical cases. We want to know about ongoing cases, but we also want to know about future cases of environmental racism. This bill is preventative. So it's not only looking back, but it's also looking forward. So I'm not sure if that comes out strongly enough in the bill, but that's, to me, the only thing that I would say would be missing.
All right, Dr. Waldron, well, we know your organization is pushing to expedite this bill. So what kind of responses have you been getting from officials regarding this?
I'm pretty good. We're hearing that the NDP, the Liberal Party, of course, and the Green Party will be supporting this bill. I've been watching the debates for quite some time, and it's very clear that those parties will be supporting the bill. And basically, that's really all we need to get this bill passed. Is votes, positive votes from those three parties. So I'm extremely hopeful, more than I ever have been. I've been doing this since 2015 provincially in Nova Scotia. I'm much more excited than I've ever been, and I think it's going to pass.
Sounds like some good news, Dr. Waldron. Now, considering today is National Indigenous Persons Day across Canada, how are Indigenous peoples impacted by environmental racism in this country in particular?
Well, it's clear that Indigenous people are more impacted by environmental racism than any other population in Canada. So you think about Pictou Landing First Nation, Boat Harbor was a top 6 site there. That was finally closed after 60 years, closed in 2020. We think of Amjinwang First Nation near Sarnia, Ontario. They're surrounded by over 60 petrochemical facilities. A current case that's getting a lot of attention is Wet'suwet'en First Nation in northern BC. They're kind of advocating against a multi-billion-dollar pipeline. There's Sabaganagati First Nation in Nova Scotia that was finally closed at the end of last year. So there have been some achievements, but we have cases popping up all the time. And I think Wet'suwet'en is one of the most serious cases. But there are also cases that many people don't know anything about. They don't get much media attention, which is actually one of the goals of the coalition. The coalition I co-founded with Nalo Charles is to start mapping and tracking and identifying cases of environmental racism that many people are unaware of.
Some very important work. Dr. Waldron, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up next, a conversation about protecting yourself against melanoma and other skin conditions while having fun in the sun. An interview with Dr. Abhishek Raut coming up next. After over 2 years of pandemic-related disruptions, Canadians are ready to have some fun in the sun this summer season. However, some experts warn that too much fun under powerful UV rays can lead to dangerous health issues. A new study published in Frontiers in Medicine warns of rising rates of melanoma in Canada. And what's interesting is that those living in southern and coastal areas are most at risk of developing this deadly form of skin cancer, according to the study led by McGill University. Well, joining us now to tell us more about this research in our weekly medical segment is Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at Appletree Medical Group. Dr. Raut, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Great to be here.
Now, after 2 long years of COVID-19 concerns, why should Canadians consider protecting themselves from skin cancer in particular, Dr. Raut?
Well, it's interesting. Melanoma or skin cancer in general is much more common than we think. It's actually more common than all the other cancers combined. So there are about 80,000 skin cancer diagnoses in Canada per year. 8,000 of these are melanomas. And so what's concerning about that is that incidence of melanoma is really going up. In the early 2000s, it was about 12 cases per 100,000. But now the national average is closer to 20 cases per 100,000. So another way to really look at that is every 66 minutes, someone gets diagnosed with melanoma.
That's a concerning rate of melanoma, Dr. Raut. Now, why are those living in southern and coastal areas more at risk?
We've had previous research that really has suggested that there's been ozone depletion as a result of climate change, and that may certainly play a factor in melanoma diagnosis. Now, that's really been well established, but we know that there are other factors that are coming into play as well. More affordable travel to sun destinations, longer life expectancy, so that gives people more time under the sun, and more time to develop cancer are a lot of these contributing factors, especially for those of us more in the south.
And taking a look at melanoma in particular, we know the study looked at melanoma. So what do we know so far about this condition?
All right, so melanoma can be hard to detect in the early stages because it has no visible signs, but there are changes that can occur over time. In medicine, we call them the ABCDEs of melanoma. So A is for asymmetry, you're looking for molds or growths with an odd shape. B is for border, so uneven or notched borders. C is for color, looking for moles with different colors or getting darker over time. D is for diameter, so moles that are larger than 1/4 inch in diameter. And E is evolution, so looking for changes in time. So the idea is if you see these changes in the ABCDEs, they are suspicious and you should contact your doctor for a check.
And what other health risks do UV rays from the sun pose, Dr. Raut?
Right, so we've talked a bit about skin cancer in general. There's also premature aging and other skin damage. So chronic exposure to the sun causes premature aging signs. The skin can become thick, wrinkled, and leathery. In fact, what's interesting is 90% of visible skin changes that we attribute to aging are actually caused by the sun. We also have cataracts that can certainly cause a loss of transparency in the lens of the eye clouding, which causes issues with vision, of course. And then finally, the immune system. We know that the skin can mount a strong defense against foreign invaders, cancers, and infections, but overexposure to that UV radiation can weaken the immune system. It can reduce the skin's ability to protect against these invaders.
All right, Doctor, a little over a minute left here, so let's talk solutions. What kind of steps can Canadians take to protect themselves from such skin diseases?
So I think applying sunscreen is quite helpful with doing any outdoor activities. That's the first thing we should recommend. Common places people would miss when applying sunscreen include the ears, the scalp, the chest, the lips, and the eyelids, and the top of the feet. So that's a very important part here.
And what about the strength of SPF? We have SPF 50, 60, even SPF 100. So should people consider wearing the highest level SPF when outside?
Yes, that's interesting. What we found is there are so many types of SPF, but really the SPF that works well is around 50. The rest are just minuscule differences there. And the idea is to keep reapplying every 2 to 3 hours.
All right, Dr. Raut, a quick 30 seconds left here, but any last messages for our summer-hungry viewers looking to get out and enjoy this season?
Look, we know with school is almost out, the warm weather is beckoning, soaking in the sun is going to be high on a lot of people's list of summer activities. Enjoy yourself. Don't sit at home. Enjoy the outdoors as much as possible, but try not to get a tan.
All right, Dr. Raut, always great having you on Forum Daily. We'll see you again next week.
Take care.
All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at important conversations from this past week. Remember, for more news on demand, you can visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks for joining us today on the Forum Daily Week in Review, and we'll see you again next time. Have a great week in Canada.